The development partners, I see the minister from Norway who is leading the way. Very exciting. And thank you for joining us. We would like to start in the next 2 minutes. 2 minutes we will start. Thank you so much for taking the seats. The Pino team, guide people on the... Good afternoon, or shall I say good evening. Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, friends, my name is Patrick Verkooyen and I'm the CEO of the Global Center on Adaptation. And I want to thank you for joining this powerhouse leaders event on climate adaptation indeed. I think there is one thing we all agree on in this room, that Africa's #1 climate priority is climate adaptation. Why? Not just because Africa is the most climate vulnerable continent, because as President Adesina has said, adaptation is big business. It's about investment, it's about jobs, it's about growth. And the good thing is, colleagues, friends, 2 years ago, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, President Adesina, President Macky Sall, the President of Ethiopia, and others launched the largest adaptation program, not just for Africa, but in the world, the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program. So President Adesina, thank you for your leadership. President Macky Sall, thank you for taking this to the global stage. What a team we have. We will hear from the other presidents in a little bit. In the first 2 years of the AAAP is a $25 billion program over 5 years. We invested over $6 billion already. But we need to be very careful and very clear. Adaptation is about people. Although we have mobilized $7 billion yet, there is no room for complacency. There's a long way to go Earlier today, we launched our report on what are the numbers on adaptation finance in Africa. Well, if there are a couple of numbers you want to get your head around, how much is flowing today to Africa on adaptation finance? $11 billion. How much should flow to Africa on an annual basis? A minimum, if you look at all the NDCs and you add it up, how much is that? $53 billion. But our analysis tells us that 53, in fact, should be $106 billion a year, i.e., $11 billion over $100 billion in needs. We need a tenfold increase. That is why we have this event today. What are we going to talk about? AAAP adaptation compacts. What do we have today to offer for you? The first 7 of these compacts. 7 leaders, 7 trailblazers, 7 investment roadmaps. And as these roadmaps will show you, there are already hundreds of adaptation projects ready to be financed. So President Adesina will explain a little bit what these compacts, what it actually will mean, but in a shorthand, they're a gravitational pull to bring investment to the national level. We know today that the investment roadmaps being presented, governments are doing their share. Bilateral parties, and we hear from Norway and from others, and the Netherlands, they're doing their share. International finance organizations, such as the African Development Bank, they're certainly doing their share. But there are 2 actor groups are missing in this space. First, foundations should step up their game in adaptation finance, and particularly the private sector is absent. So these investment roadmaps being launched today, the first 7, we know, of course, Africa is not 7 countries. Africa happens to be 54 countries. So see this as the first batch of these transformative compacts to be put on the table, and think about it. Comes COP28, 7 should be 54. And the first 7 should be capitalized. Because we know investing in adaptation is simply good business, and we can do it. Knowing that this is the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, knowing that we're at least 1 hour behind schedule, knowing that some of the leaders on stage need to go in a plane, we want to keep this session extremely focused, much shorter than what is programmed for. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, you have been with us from the beginning. You are not only the 8th Secretary General of the United Nations, which is a big achievement in itself, you are the architect behind the Paris Agreement, and you are today here in your capacity as the chairperson of the Global Center on Adaptation. Secretary General, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your very kind introduction. I would like to recognize His Excellency Macky Sall, President of Senegal, Her Excellency Saleh Jode, President of Ethiopia, and Her Excellency Susulu Hassan, President of Tanzania. And also I'd like to really appreciate and recognize President Akinwumi Adesina, President of African Development Bank, Excellencies, ministers, ambassadors, colleagues, and representatives of civil society, and ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure. I'm overwhelmed by your very strong large presence in this very important agenda. We are making progress on many fronts, yet the evidence of the catastrophic effects of climate change is ever increasing. We are in a race against the time. We cannot afford to fall, and we cannot afford to fail. The international community has committed to doubling adaptation finance by 2025. Now, there is both the need and the opportunity to transform the level of adaptation finance for Africa. Building on the Bridgetown Agenda and the Summit for a new Global Financing Pact, I welcome the launch of Climate Adaptation Country Compact at this summit. With these compacts, African leaders have defined the investment priorities and adaptation needs for African countries. They are a vital country-led tool that will support the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, AAAP, which is the world's most ambitious adaptation plan. At a time when droughts and floods are becoming more frequent and more intense, adaptation has never been more vital to Africa. Through these investment compacts, the AAAP places climate adaptation at the center of Africa's march to sustainable economic transformation and green growth. It is within this ambition that the AAAP has already delivered support to projects worth over $5 billion. With this investment, over 35 million people will have access to climate-smart agriculture, infrastructure, and cities in almost 30 countries in Africa. These investments will not only protect Africa from climate change, but will also help create more than 500,000 jobs for Africa's young people. Here in Kenya, the AAAP is boosting digital transformation to offer solutions and support to Africa's smallholder farmers. Ongoing work to design adaptation investment in water, urban resilience, and infrastructure are a vital part of the answer to climate change. Africa now represents the world's greatest opportunity for human development and economic growth. Its potential far exceeds the barriers that presently impede the rise of such a mighty continent. I hope that when COP28 convenes in Dubai, United Arab Emirates in December, we will see the investment that is required starting to flow into Africa's adaptation compacts. While serving as Secretary General at the United Nations, I have been always stating and emphasizing that if we are not able to address the African challenges, we will never be able to declare that we are living in a sustainable world. I still believe that is correct direction. And ladies and gentlemen, let us really work together. We both, for political leaders, you have a political responsibility, but for me now, out of my job as a Secretary General, I'm now a retired person, I have a moral responsibility. So combining political and moral responsibility together, I think that there is nothing which we cannot overcome. And it is a matter of justice that we must do more for African people. The rate of greenhouse gas emissions emitted from this African continent, where 54 countries are existing, is less than 3%, while we compared with China, United States, they're all 20% or 18% or something like this. Therefore, it is unfair, and it is only right for us to do to help African people. Africans are in the eye of storm, practically speaking. Therefore, we really must do. That is the reason why this Global Center on Adaptation is really trying to mobilize funding. I am urging again, repeatedly, that the international community should increase 10 times than the current level of financial support. Annually, African 54 countries, they receive $11 billion a year. We have to raise it to 10 times until 2035. By that time, we may have $1.7 trillion by that time. Without that, we will not be able to address this justice issue, climate justice issue. So let us work together to help this African agenda together. And I'm very much grateful for your strong commitment. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. For me, 3 takeaways. 1, there is nothing like retirement. If you just look at Secretary General, he just came in, all the meetings, leaving afterwards. And I know you will be excused soon, sir, to take your plane to your next meeting in another continent. So thank you very much. Second part is, yes, this is a moral imperative to invest in adaptation, of course. But there is also an economic imperative. It is smart investment. And thirdly, as you said, SG, this can be done. It's practical. We're doing it. But what we need scale and we need speed. That brings me to the next speaker. A speaker who, quite frankly, brought some of us, including myself, in shock last Sunday. Last Sunday, imagine intergenerational dialogue. President Ruto and the speaker I'm going to introduce came on stage without a bow tie. And that was quite something. But the same speaker also in that particular event said, well, actually, youth is not a lost case. You need to invest in youth and social capital and human capital. And you came with a big announcement last Sunday, which I hope you will also make here in this event. So President Adesina, President of the African Development Bank, investment compacts, what does it mean?
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, President Slu, Your Excellency, President Macky Sall, my big sister, President Saliwok Zuide, the young Secretary General who is not going to be retired, and Patrick Vakuijan. I normally say Patrick has a lot of renewable energy, but I've actually added something to it. He has nuclear energy as well. Thank you very much, and sorry that our event is starting late. So I just make a few remarks because Secretary General needs to actually leave. First and foremost is that in the African society, if you go to a public market, you find our elders, their mothers there that carries their babies on their back, right? And we have a saying in my own culture that say the elders cannot be in the open market and watch the heads of the baby slump on their mother's back. And so when you see elders that are here today to talk about this issue, that's because Africa isn't getting the resources it needs to adapt to climate change. So what they're trying to do is basically be here to be sure that the head of the baby is not slumping on the mother's back. And that's why we have leaders. Please give it up to them. Africa suffers a lot from climate change. Make no mistakes about it. We lose already $7 to $15 billion a year because of climate change. That's going to rise to $40 billion by 2030 if we do not do anything about it. But as the Secretary General said, it's really how much are we getting to be able to tackle this problem. The fact of the matter is that we're not getting really much. Only 3% of total global finance is actually coming to Africa. This is the continent where 9 out of the 10 most vulnerable countries to climate change are in sub-Saharan Africa. 100% of them are the countries that depend on the African Development Fund, which many of you are here, and also the minister from Norway and others, and Netherlands and others are here, that you support. But the fact of the matter is that we need to raise, as we said, at least $50-something billion for climate adaptation, and maybe even $100 billion per year for climate adaptation in Africa. And what's the African Development Bank doing about this? First, today, we have invested, as of last year, 63% of all of our climate finance has gone into climate adaptation. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, called for 50-50 between adaptation and mitigation. We have exceeded that. We are at 63% of that. And that is the highest globally. And that's because we know that this is where the real problem is. What are we doing to raise more money? First and foremost, we set up something called the AAP, African Adaptation Acceleration Program. By the way, that is the largest program on adaptation in the world. And we are focusing that in Africa. And that's a $25 billion program. And there's something they call a down payment. And so we have put a down payment. If you're going to get a house, mortgage, you put a down payment. And so we had a $25 billion thing that we want to build. So we put a down payment. So the African Development Bank has put down a down payment of $12.5 billion towards the AAP. What we are trying to raise is to raise the balance of the $12.5 billion. And how are we going to do that? That brings me to Dakar. President Macky Sall and I and other heads of state and government, we organized the Dakar Summit, wherein we were talking about agriculture. How are we going to make sure Africa can feed itself? And to do that, President Macky Sall and I agreed that we needed to be focused. What are the projects that are going to be funded? Where are they going to be funded? How much money do they need? What is the monitoring framework to be sure the money is actually being allocated right? The impacts are there. We must be accountable. There must be accountability. It's not just about raising money. We have to be accountable for what those monies are going to be used for. So we put together the Food and Agriculture Delivery Compacts for the Feed Africa Summit. My sister Nados is here. We work together from NEPAD, AUD. And guess what? We raised $72 billion towards that. Why? Because people know exactly where the monies are going to go into. And so we decided then to borrow from that for the climate adaptation resources we need to raise. So we have climate adaptation investment compacts. Those compacts are the ones that are going to determine what the country is going to do, what exactly are the results we are going to expect, what's the rate of return on the investment, how are we going to measure things to be sure the communities and all that are giving us feedback. We want a framework that is clear, transparent, accountable in delivering the money. And that's why we are launching these climate adaptation investment compacts. We have 7 countries now. We want to do, I think, Patrick, we want to do another 14 before, and we're going to do it for all of Africa. And that is what is most important, I want to say. Just to close so I don't take much of your time, I want to also say that the thing that we want to do as African Development Bank towards this compact is we will deploy 2 new instruments. First, we have something called the African Climate Adaptation Window of the African Development Fund, which today is $429 million. We want to grow that to $13 billion, and all that $13 billion will go towards financing the Climate Adaptation Investment Compact. The second is the African Development Fund. As I told you, those countries that are suffering the most from climate change depend on the concessional window of the bank, the African Development Fund. So we are taking that fund to the market, using the equity that we have accumulated in it to raise an additional $27 billion. All that $27 billion when raised will be used to support the least developed countries that are most vulnerable to climate change to be able to deploy it for adaptation. Adaptation works. And I'll give one example, and I said, the president of Ethiopia will be sharing with us, my big sister, about the great successes they are having in Ethiopia with regard to wheat. Ladies and gentlemen, if we don't adapt, we have no choice. But to adapt, we must finance adaptation. We must raise more money. So please, I want to see by a show of hand, if that gives you confidence to invest in adaptation as opposed to mitigation. Can I just see your hands, please? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. You're in the right place. Now we will listen to our heads of state about these adaptation investment compacts. Welcome again, and thanks for all you do.
Thank you so much, President Adesina, for your inspiring words, but even more important for your inspiring action. But at the end of the day, that's how we all will get measured. Today is September 5. Last year, exactly on the same day, we had the Africa Adaptation Summit in the Netherlands. And the chairperson of the African Union at that time flew to the Netherlands with his colleagues, and his colleagues, I mean, one of them is here. And quite frankly, President Macky Sall, you were upset. You came to Europe and you said, well, I bring Africa's plan to Europe. we're ready to partner, and where are my European counterparts? Now, a year later, you also said in the meantime, but we, Africa, we're not waiting. We keep going. We're ready for partnering. So today, you're putting your investment compact on the table. We're very keen to hear your vision. President Macky Sall.
Maybe to win time, I can just speak from here. I'm sorry. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Merci beaucoup, cher Ban Ki-moon, cher secrétaire général. Vous n'êtes pas en retraite. Nous avons besoin de vous, de vos conseils. Donc on ne peut pas vous lâcher en si bon chemin.
Thank you also to my two sisters. I'm really well supported by the President Samia and my sister, the President Saleh from Ethiopia, the President of Tanzania. Of course, our two champions, President Adesina, President of the African Development Bank, and the energy thank you, all of you, for this meeting. I would like to simply say that adaptation is a priority, an absolute priority. It is the #1 priority of Africa in terms of climate. It is obvious because Africa is the most vulnerable continent. It has been said several times. It is vulnerable to climate change, and we have the least developed countries on the continent. I talk of Senegal, where we need to concentrate both on the challenges and the fight against poverty. But at the same time, we have to face climate change issues on an annual basis with the non-predictability of climate meteorological aspects. Today, every year, you can go from drought to unbelievable. So these are effects which are felt. I'm not talking about erosion. We have 700 meters of the coastal area. All the villas and the coast are buried every year because the sea sometimes spills over. Sometimes we say that the Atlantic Sea is taking on to 2 kilometers per year. So these are global changes which deserve serious measures and appropriate measures. We are here at the Africa Climate Summit because climate change is having a toll, a clear toll, both on our recent developments as well as on the progress that we want to achieve. That's why we are confronted with dangers, constant dangers which are increasingly more and more serious as a result of extreme weather conditions. When I go towards the Indian Ocean, where I find countries like Mozambique, like Comoros, Madagascar, in terms of tropical temperatures, we can understand we're not talking about a desert in the Sahel area or in Sahara or even in the Kalahari Desert. So it is truly, these are real challenges which Africa is facing at the moment. Now, these effects, you find it regarding the health of the population, on agriculture, sustainable agriculture, but also the lifestyle, and the report is very clear, which confirms that it is a scientific report which doesn't have to be debated. It is very clear that if nothing is done for adaptation, the African which needs development like other parts of the world, and Africa has a very high population, more than 2 billion. They have to develop their economies. So if this development is not supported through adaptation, speedy adaptation, that means we are all going to have a catastrophe a certain catastrophe in our continent. So mitigation, it's clear, by mitigating we can be able to achieve good results. But I think what we did last year during the Rotterdam Summit on adaptation in Africa, I had presented as the President of the African Union at the time, I presented our financing plan in Africa for adaptation on the continent, given the situation of climate change. It was a program, an acceleration program for adaptation in Africa by what we call triple P, PPPAAA, triple A, P, it's like Anglophones say. So this program gave impressive results, and I want to thank you for the commitment of African Development Bank. It is their commitment of $25 billion, so we have a gap of 12.5 billion in order to go to a higher level within the framework of acceleration. This year in Nairobi, I want to talk about the investment roadmap for Senegal. I'm talking about Africa, but it is a window for Senegal. So this is very clear in our pact for adaptation, and just like he said, we had an experience, a very original experience, its impact on sustainable agriculture. We asked each president with their partners, agricultural partners in a country, and we presented the program. So the compact was presented, and the commitments were made on the basis of concrete projects. I think on adaptation, we can repeat the same activity. What is the program of adaptation for each country, taking into account our NDCs? But I think that with the multilateral system, with adequate funding, of course, because Africa, in brackets, does not. Africa is fighting hard for its own adaptation, but at what price are we doing it? Let's take the case of energy, for example, where we call upon the APPP for the independent producers. Even for solar energy, you take IPP, and yet the private company will be indebted on the market given the commercial conditions. And of course, there is a risk. A real risk, which means that we need to give guarantees.
Donc, le prix de revient devient trop cher, et ce qui fait que l'Afrique a du mal à accélérer. Mais avec le solaire, on peut multiplier par 10 nos capacités.
With solar energy, we can multiply by 10 our energy capacities if funding is unlocked. To end, because we are pressed for time, I would like to say that Africa should open up to the adaptation market in other regions of the world, like Asia, South Asia, for example, has already made adaptation a very important economic activity, especially in the private sector. With the private sector. So it is high time in Africa the private sector intervene, be it through sustainable energy like IPPs, in clean water production like desalination of seawater, and also reduce risks related to the intervention of the private sector in adaptation projects in Africa. I suggest that in Dubai, Africa should hold a single position about adaptation, and through the voice of our colleague William Ruto, who had the merit to organize this conference, and Africa as a whole will follow that point. We don't want to follow our partners at times have to follow 20,000 narratives, and at one point they face challenges. They don't know which one to follow. But this time we will speak in one voice, and we hope this partnership will make COP28 a great success. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, President Macky Sall, for continuing to lead on the adaptation agenda and also be so practical and focused on investments. In your compact, it's very clear. The investments are identified. You, as your government, putting money on the table, you're on track. The bilateral support needs to be a little bit up, to 27% to be precise. Of the IFIs, also 27% and up. But it's particularly the private sector which needs to be brought to the table. And you're ready with projects in Senegal to make that happen. As you indicated, Mr. President, we plan to bring these investment compacts to COP28 and indeed invite all of you to bring your resources to the table around these compacts. Speaking of leaving, you, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, you have to go to the airport right now. Hopefully you will take this adaptation agenda with you in all your continued conversation. And again, I want to thank you very much for being with us. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. The next speaker on the program is a phenomenal leader, also from Africa, President Samia Suluhu Hassan. Secretary, thank you so much. Thank you so much. The floor is yours, Madam President.
Thank you, Professor Patrick. From me, is expressing our sincere gratitude, and this is from my government and the people of the United Republic of Tanzania for GCA, supporting Tanzania in preparation of the Tanzania Climate Change Adaptation Compact, which has been completed in time, and it is here to date, ready to be launched. So thank you very, very much. But then the compact seeks to promote sustainable development, protect vulnerable population, and enhance the country's capacity to adapt to changing climate conditions. But the primary goal is to support Tanzania to adapt to adverse effects of climate change very effectively. So we say thank you very much. But then the Tanzanian Compact, just after completion, we had a disbursement of $800 million, and this is for investing in resilient infrastructure to support trade and the transport of food and food security with a focus on digital climate advisory services. The whole compact cost, or the total cost for the compact, is around $9.9 billion in the coming 3 years, and this is $1 billion in the coming 3 years. And we are aware that the Global Center for Adaptation cannot raise these funds alone. So my government is ready to work with you in asking for these funds from various sectors, private sector, international community, name it. We are ready to work with you to raise this fund. And so I humbly take this opportunity to invite the GCA to Tanzania to come and visit and support us in fundraising, which will be done in November, the investment roundtable discussion, which will involve all key stakeholders at national level and development partners. So we are ready. We have been given the seed money. We are expecting to receive more money, but we are ready to raise money on our own ways. We just want the support of the Global Center for Adaptation. So having said that, once again, thank you, the center, very much for this very big support, and we're here ready to launch our compact. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Also, congratulations with launching your investment roadmap.
Yeah.
Second, GCA, of course, stands ready to support you. And President Adesina, the same applies to the African Development Bank, indeed. So thank you again very much. The next speaker is a person who has been with us, a leader in all the AAAP conception phase, design meetings, strategic meetings, political meetings, President of Ethiopia. Madam President, you have the floor.
Je fais tout ça. Thank you very much. It's getting late. I'm trying to be as short as possible. Excellencies, dear participants, Africa's vulnerabilities and so on have been, presented throughout the day. In Ethiopia, there is no exception. We are at high risk of natural disasters, such as flooding in many parts of the country, and vulnerable to extreme and severe climate stresses. We have experienced many years of poor rains exposing us to drought and so on. I'm not here to restate the numerous challenges our countries have faced, but to emphasize that the summit is really timely. The summit also timely as adaptation is a core theme. Africa's climate concerns can be addressed by strengthening our adaptive capacities. However, there remains a funding gap to finance adaptation interventions, which our countries have made sufficient plans for. In Ethiopia, we have our National Development Plan that identifies options across Ethiopia's most vulnerable sectors. We have also invested in building resilience through productive safety net programs, such as the Green Legacy Initiative that I have presented in the morning, planting billions of trees, and the wheat production success story. We have our cross-sectoral national adaptation plan that is working to integrate adaptation in our long-term development pathway at all levels, from national to regional. With the criticality and scale of Africa's adaptation needs, it's important that we join forces to work together with the support and partnership of our international partners and financing institutions as well. I'm glad to see that the cause of adaptation is progressing concretely, particularly through the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program that has been presented earlier, which I'm proud to have been a part since its launch, as you have said. The program is doing its part to mobilize adaptation financing through mainstreaming adaptation in projects and programs of multilateral development banks, having done so into investments worth of 5.4 billion in downstream projects of the African Development Bank and the World Bank. The Adaptation Investment Compacts being unveiled today as a concrete tool for showcasing bankable opportunities which our partners can invest in. Ethiopia has clearly set out plans and welcomes the support of the ADB and the Global Center on Adaptation in transforming these plans into investable business opportunities and providing a clear roadmap through the adaptation investment compacts. As we head to COP28, there must be a clear commitment for adaptation financing and acceleration of the commitments already made by developed countries. These adaptation compacts will help provide the basis to accelerate these commitments, and I hope that will be the case. So I think this is very important that we accelerate those if we want to have our countries progressing to a more better future. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madam President. And we know, of course, that at this moment in time yet, there is no investment compact in Ethiopia, but we're very committed to work with you. African Development Bank and GCA to make that happen before COP28 indeed. So let's turn the table. We've heard from African leaders, we heard from the president of the African Development Bank, but there are also partners in this room here who have been with us from the beginning, not just conceptually or spiritually, financially. And the largest contributor to the AAAP from the get-go is Norway. So I'm very honored on turnaround to give you the floor to share your vision. What's next?
Excellencies, friends, it's an honor to be here at Africa's own climate summit to listen and also to discuss the way ahead. Thank you for inviting me and giving me the floor. You know, we all have to deliver to gain the trust in the work that we are doing on the climate issue. And my government needs to prove to Norway's population that we are keeping our promises to cut emissions, and we need to deliver on our promises of finance. And we are delivering on our Glasgow pledge, but money and documents, that's not the goal. The goal is action on the ground, life-changing action, life-saving action, and that is what adaptation is all about. And I am very impatient. My key priority is food security. And what any farmer or fisherman in Norway or in Africa knows very well is that food security has all to do with climate adaptation, and adaptation and food security are two sides of the same coin. If there ever was a time to invest in African food production, it is now. In a sustainable way, not reproducing the mistakes in existing food systems. And I see small-scale food producers as the backbone of our food system. I believe in their ability to work the land, the water resources, the natural resources in a sustainable way, providing food and prosperity for local markets, for regional markets, and contributing to the food sovereignty of each country. And we all know, of course, that women's participation in this is a prerequisite for prosperity, whether it be on the household level or the nation. And many, many of these women are small-scale food producers. So the call for action is obvious. We must increase investments in sustainable, climate-resilient, small-scale food production. Like President Ruto said so eloquently yesterday, the green transformation also presents opportunities. And one of those opportunities is for these 33 million small-scale farmers on the African continent to work their way out of poverty. I call on everyone to stand by our commitments, scale up climate finance, and increase investments in adaptation, food production, and resilience. At COP in Glasgow, Norway committed to double our climate finance and at least triple support to adaptation by 2026. And today I'm very, very happy to say that we have already reached our goal on doubling climate finance 2 years ahead of schedule, and we are on good way to deliver on our pledge on adaptation. And let me also say that we applaud the AAA program. Through the AAA, Africa-led, we are working together to reverse the continent's vulnerability to climate change. And as part of this, we bring climate-resilient techniques and technologies to small-scale farmers who grow the most of African food. So how can we together minimize the risk of climate-induced disasters? How can we make food systems more resilient? How can we, at the same time, create millions of cool jobs along the local and regional value chains for a growing population and strengthening Africa's own food sovereignty? I encourage all partners to join our efforts. And may I add, investments must not add to Africa's debt burden. Norway provides grants. We encourage all other partners to do the same. And thank you. And let me just finally say that I'm looking forward to our continuing relationship and partnership with GCA. We have and of course with the African Development Bank and other institutions in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Minister. It's indeed true, not everything in life is about finance, but finance and adaptation combined is actually not a bad thing to do. And Norway, having your pledge, your climate finance pledge already delivered 3 years ahead of your delivery date is an remarkable achievement indeed. The next speaker is not only Deputy Prime Minister, but is also Finance Minister and a big supporter of the Global Center on Adaptation and the Adaptation Agenda indeed. So, Mr. President, if you could just listen quickly to the Deputy Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Sigrid Kaag. She has the floor. Thank you so much.
Well, all protocols observed. I mean, I was wondering, sitting here in this actually fairly warm room, if all had not been said today. And I would say there are 4 takeaways. One of them is anyone who dares to turn up to the next conference without having acted, financed, changed, delivered on results, I think should consider that their CO2 emission is not worth the trip. So be careful what you promise, what you commit to, because you need to commit, you need to act, you need to deliver. Secondly, in listening to all these conversations, all dots connect. A lot of the conversation here has been about adaptation, but the link to finance is a critical and real one. And financing, for me, is not traditional ODA. That's a given. Yes, increase in grants is necessary, but we need to, as developed countries, as bigger shareholders, we need to rechannel the SDRs. We need to look at debt relief. We need to look at the sensitivity of debt relief. When investments are made, we need to balance that out. We need to consider a lot of the important elements of the Bridgetown Initiative. This is not a free ride. This is a compact that needs to accompany adaptation and mitigation. Without it, I don't think we can see meaningful progress. And again, we'll speak to each other again next year, but perhaps with a slightly greater level of frustration and an even greater sense of urgency, because we've lost 1 more year, which a lot of countries do not have. Madagascar, a very strong case in point. Comor, all the other countries that President Macky Sall, in addition to his own country, mentioned. Last but not least, the common framework. There's a serious set of proposals out there. Shareholders need to act. This is not a case only for African countries or highly indebted countries. We need to be interested to have a credible, reformed MDB. Collective action clauses are essential. Climate resilient debt clauses are very important to have. And of course, local currency financing. I'm mentioning the last one because we've helped initiate this as the Netherlands to help countries avoid borrowing against highly expensive, interest rate prone hikes, foreign currencies. Do it in your own currency. Build your own economy. Ultimately, adaptation is all about national ownership and accountability, and with accountability, we also look towards governance. That's a triangle where the member states and governments that seek support for adaptation in their covenant will also need to be mindful of. Western and developed countries, endowed countries, the big emitters, the big polluters, we have a duty of care, and therefore we need to push the debate on carbon pricing and taxation, because it's all about production and consumption and behavior change. Without that, our collective will fail, and as has been said in the corona crisis, we are as strong as the weakest link. And the weakest link may not be in the port of Rotterdam, but we need to care from the vantage point of a Western industrialized country, from a global responsibility for a shared humanity, about the weakest link, which is all of us. So a lot of pointers, a lot of finance. It's my hat of finance. And last but not least, there is a coalition of ministers of finance. A lot of African countries are there, but I urge all African countries who are not yet a member to join the coalition of finance ministers. This is where we'll push the agenda even forward and really connect all the dots. Adaptation without finance, mitigation without serious finance is just not a credible conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister of the Netherlands, Sigrid Kaag, for your very comprehensive remarks indeed. The next speaker is the minister from China, Minister Wang, because we want to know how is China contributing to the adaptation agenda in Africa and AAAP in particular. Minister Wang, you have the floor. Thank you so much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much for your kind invitation. So please get your headphone. Okay, I will speak Chinese. 各位阁下，各位同事、女士们、先生们，大家下午好。
Good afternoon.
非常高兴能够出席
It's
这
my
次的会议。
pleasure to join this event.
当前气候系统持
Constant
续变暖，
global
极
warming
端气候事
and
件多发
extreme
频发，
weather
给全球带来广
are
泛而深
causing
刻的不利影
extensive
响。
and profound
和风险。
impact and risks to the
采
world.
取积极应对、适应气候
Taking
变化
positive adaptation
是
actions
现实而迫
is
切
a
的
realistic,
必然选择。
pressing, and inevitable
中国
choice.
的气候类型复杂，
China has
区域
complex
差异大，
climates and huge
是全球气候
regional
变化的敏
differences,
感区。
very sensitive to
和生态环
global
境的
climate
脆弱
change
性。
with fragile
2022
ecosystems. In
中国的极端
2020,
高温事件频
extreme
发，
heat events,
高温和干旱
high
风险指数
temperature,
为1961年以来，
and drought
也就是近
risk
60年来
indexes
最
in
高。
China recorded the
平均
worst
降水
since
日数为
1961,
近60
and
年来
the
最
average
少。
days of
极端的天气气候事
precipitation
件
also recorded the
造成
lowest
全
since
国的农作物
1961.
受灾
Extreme
面
weather and climate
达到
events caused
1206万公顷，
12.068 million hectares of
达到
crop
2747
damage nationwide,
亿
with a
人民
direct
币。
economic loss of
今年中国北方的暴
214.75
雨
billion RMB.
和洪
This year,
水
heavy rains
也
and
造成
floods
了
in
重大
northern
的生
China
命
have also
和
caused
财产损失。
significant loss
我
of
们对
life and
气候系统的
property.
变化感到越来越
We are
高的不确定性，越来越强的
Increasingly
不可琢磨。
concerned about the
为有
uncertainty
效
of
防范
climate
气候
change.
变化带来
In
的不
order
利
to
影响和
prevent
风
the
险，
impact
中国
caused
正
by
在积极
climate
实施
change, China is
国家适
actively
应气候变化
implementing the
战
national
略
strategy for
2035
adaptation to climate change
加强气候
2035,
变化的脆弱
strengthening
性，
vulnerability
和
assessments
风险
and
评估，
impact study of climate
推
change,
动省级行政区
promoting
域
adaptation
适应行动
actions
和
at
气候
the
适应型
provincial
城
level
市建设等
and
试点，
piloting climate
强化
resilient
各重点
cities,
领域和重点区域
and
的适应
strengthening
气候变化
adaptation
工作，
activities
努力
across
提
all
升
key areas
全
and
国的
regions
适应气
in
候变
its
化能力。
effort to national
中国
capacity
对发
building
展中
in
国家，尤
adaptation.
其是非洲国家，
China
遭受
relates
的气候
strongly
变
to
化
developing countries,
所带
especially
来的
those
不
in
利影
Africa,
响感
on
同
the
身受。
impact
因为
from
中国也是
climate
一个
change,
全球
as
最大的
China is
有14
the
亿人口的
largest
发展
developing
中国家。
country in the world with
一直以来，
1.4 billion
我们通
population.
过南南
China
合
has
作，
been providing
为其他
support
发展中
to
国家
developing
应对气候
countries
变化
through
提
the
供支持。
South-South cooperation framework in
到
addressing
2021年
climate
底，
change.
中国
In
与
late
非洲
2021,
共同发布
China
了
and Africa jointly
中非
launched the
应对气候变化合作宣言，
Declaration on China-Africa
建立了
cooperation
新
on
时代
combating climate
中
change,
非应对气候变
establishing
化
the
战略合作伙伴关
China-Africa
系，
strategic partnership
并
to
启动
address
了
climate change in the
中
new
非应
era
对气候变化
with
3
a
年行动计划。
3-year action plan.
中国还将于近期启动
Recently,
非
China
洲
will
光带项目，
launch the program
投
Africa
入至
Solar
少1
Belt,
亿人民币，
investing at least
帮助5万
100
户左
million
右的
RMB
非洲
to help
无电
around
地区国家
50,000 poor African families
用
in
电造
areas
地问题，
without power supply to
助力
provide
非洲的绿
lighting
色低碳发
with
展。
green and low carbon
同时，
energy.
中国与
Meanwhile,
世界气象
China
组织
and the
签署了
WMO
关
have
于支持
signed
联合国
a
全民
cooperation
早期
agreement
预警
on
的倡
supporting
议
the UN
和合作
Early
协议，
Warning for All initiative
将在气候变化南南合
to
作框架
carry
下，
out cooperation
共
projects
同开发
under
实
the
施
South-South
早
framework
期预警
in
合
order
作项
to
目，
provide early warning
向包括
facilities
非洲国家在内的
and
其他发展中国家
capacity
提
building
供
to
早期预警
developing
设备和能力
countries,
建设。
including
现在我们已
African
经向
ones.
部
We
分
have
国家提供了
provided
卫星的
multiple
地面接收
countries
站，
with
以帮助这些国
satellite
家
facilities
在
to
暴
help
雨、
those
在
countries
洪涝
to
灾害
get
这方
early
面的
warning
预警能
about
力。
rains and
中方十分理
and
解和支持
floods. China
非
fully
洲国家
understands the
关于
concerns
适应气候变化
and
和
supports
气候咨询
the
方面的
demands
关
of
切
African
和诉
countries
求。
regard to
我
climate
在这
change
次会议上，
adaptation,
我听到了很多
adaptation
国
and
家元
financing.
首
Furthermore, I've
和
heard
部长们
from
的发
a
言，
lot of
特别是
remarks
来自
from
非
the
洲地
heads
区的
of states, especially those from Africa. talking about their need for adaptation financing and the relationship between mitigation and adaptation. I call for international communities, especially the developed countries, to provide financial support to African countries, stronger financial resources to developing countries. As developing countries, including African ones, are the main victims of climate change, and they have invested huge domestic resources in dealing with climate change, while developed countries, which bear historical responsibility for climate change, should provide developing countries with adequate financial, technological, and capacity building support for adaptation. China is willing to work with African countries to promote multilateral processes on key issues, including the Global Goal on Adaptation Framework, the roadmap for doubling adaptation funding, and the loss and damage fund. At the same time, China is willing to further strengthen exchanges with African countries in adaptation, share adaptation experience and case studies with each other, deepen our practical partnerships, and jointly promote climate resilient development. That's all for my speech. Thank you to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honourable Minister, for your strong support for Africa on multiple agendas, including on climate adaptation. And we really hope that at COP28, that China will come on board around the AAAP and the investment compacts as one of the contributors indeed. Our next speaker is the speaker from Equatorial Guinea, representing the President. Please, you have the floor, sir.
Buenas tardes, con la venia. Señores ministros, señores presidentes de las instituciones financieras internacionales, quisiera rápidamente compartir con ustedes la experiencia de una pequeña nación.
One of the small dimensions that I've been able to do, and when we talk about the natural resources, which we call Guinea equity. In this country, we have 1.2 million people when we are living with them, and with the level of natural resources and also the natural resources. We have two different regions where we are able to do this kind of business. We have 2 kilometers. We are doing all this, and we are doing all this kind of business with the people of Equatorial Guinea. And the country here we are talking about 2 million. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation which you have presented, because we have the potential to be able to understand the coastal region. However, we have been able to share this kind of an experience that we are living in our country, and we are still facing different difficulties when we are talking about the food security, and we are talking about the development of human beings. The change that we are facing in Equatorial Guinea is one of the priorities that we are talking about. We are facing a lot of challenges when we are talking about time, when we talk about, but we are trying to try our level best to be able to face these kind of challenges at the level of the government. And we are talking about the increment of the sea level, and the way they have said those who presented before. And we are talking about the invasion of the sea, and we are talking about this when you're talking about the presentation of the year. And we are having this kind of intervention for the government, and we have been having different interventions to be able to respond or to control this kind of difficulties that we are facing. To be able to talk about the level of the sea, we are talking about the temperatures that are really rising each day, and it is becoming a real problem. And talking about the 10 years, past 10 years, we have been able to put so many political initiatives, to be able to count on these challenges in the year 2013, and we have been able also to present all this in 2015, 2018, and 2021, and we have been able to present different actions to be able to curb these and to have an update, and we have been able to also to be able to present all these kind of the climatic changes, and we are having a collaboration together with the national governments, all levels, to be able to understand these programs in our country. The program that we are talking about, the climate in our country, and the point of reference that we are presenting when we are talking about the way to recover from this, we are talking about to be how we are able to avoid being victims, and we are experiencing a 33% of this kind of change because we are being threatened by this kind of challenges. We are trying to advance each day and to be able to face this when we talk about the economy of the country, and giving or funding this kind of changes in the level of our country. Looking forward for the year 2030, we need a fund of $30 million to be able to face this kind of changes. And I want to thank the initiative that we have been able to present in Africa, and the African Bank, the Zimbabwe, and we have been able to collaborate together with other governments in the continent. I think that we really need to continue collaborating with one another to be able to face these kind of challenges, and we are calling upon every kind of a government to come up to talk about these natural resources that we have before ourselves, but to be able to also to talk about the way we are going to give funds, and we are looking forward to look away where we are going to have this fund, and we are happy to.
Thank you so much, Honourable Minister, on behalf of your President delivering your remarks, and congratulations for announcing and launching today your investment compact on adaptation indeed. The last speaker of this dialogue today basically follows up on the initial remarks of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, because adaptation is in essence about justice, doing the right thing indeed. That's why it's important that we have today here with us the President of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, Mitika. You have the floor, please. Mitika is here? Indeed. A warm applause indeed.
Thanks, Patrick, and Excellency, the President of African Development Bank, and all the guests here. Allow me to stand on the existing protocols. As the African civil society, we have worked with the African Development Bank in a very robust manner, and I think it is one of the regional financial institutions which is really benchmarking on how to work with communities and particularly the civil society, because we believe that the only way to reach the people, the only way to work and ensure that the policies which we pass, the strategies like what we are doing now, is really implemented and have impact to the people at the front line of the climate crisis. This is an imperative of climate justice and the consultation, ensuring that the implementers of the policies which we make then are involved in their design. And I want really to commend the AFDB for this very groundbreaking initiative they have worked for. We have been following it. Of course, you know it is an experiment because it's like a pilot, but I think the largest so far initiative in the world. At global level, we have been fighting for increased financing to adaptation. Of course, we know that, and that is what is claimed, that adaptation has no returns on investment. And I believe that through the AAAP, we can demonstrate that adaptation indeed has returns on investment, because we have seen some of the things, some of the young people which are doing, and I think there are a lot of innovations which are proving that wrong. We will continue working with partners like this. But for us, it is not sufficient. We want to put pressure on the global community, on those who are responsible for causing the climate crisis, not to transfer the burden of action to the people already suffering and put more money into pockets like this, into baskets like this. And we also want to commend governments like the Dutch government and those others who are interested. There are also initiatives, of course, in Africa. And what we want to encourage the AAAS, the GCA, is let's avoid the application. We need really to work and ensure that we bring the efforts which are there, we work with them. For instance, in Africa, and I know you are working with them, with African Adaptation Initiative, among others, ClimDev and those others. Let us see, because that is why we are here at the African Climate Summit. There are so many things happening there, but working in different ways, working in silos. The most important thing is that if we bring this together, they are going to help us and support the people on the ground. We need enormous resources to really ensure that we lift the people at the front line of the climate crisis. Today we were at the safari park with supporting under the FLOCA, Financing Locally Led Climate Action. And part of that is adaptation. We need to take it to the people, and we will work together with AFDB, GCA, and those others who are interested in supporting this initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and also thank you for your strong support for the AAAP and in particular for the Adaptation Investment Compacts, indeed, and we look forward to working with you in the near future. President Adesina, we have heard many speakers, African heads of states, ministers of finance, development ministers, deputy prime ministers, climate justice movement. What is next?
Well, let me first and foremost thank you all for being here and for your patience in staying to the end of this event. Three things just on the way forward from what you've had today. First is that we will now do a double down on the Climate Adaptation Investment Compacts. We will double the number right now. We have 14 before the end of the year. And by mid-next year, we will have been able to do for all of African countries. So that's the first thing that is coming up. The second thing is the roadmap to COP28. And so there's going to be a meeting convened by President Macky Sall and President Ruto with myself and Secretary General Ban Ki-moon that will bring together a few heads of state around their own investment compacts that you have listened to today, even some of those that will come on later. And the whole idea is to concretize the investment projects in those countries ahead of COP28. So when we get to COP28, it's all about actions. You can see that what we're trying to do is to move away from words to real action, making sure there are resources available quickly to allow countries to execute the climate adaptation actions at the country level. The other thing we're going to do is in terms of the policy support for climate adaptation. You saw the heads of state here today. We are going to move beyond that. There's going to be the establishment of Presidential Council over the Adaptation Compacts, chaired by the presidents, that makes sure that the resources are actually mobilized and that the actions are actually taken, the results are actually being monitored, and there is full accountability for the results, for the resources that are being put there. And finally, Patrick and I were just talking whether we should unveil it here or not, but I think I should mention it, that we are thinking of converting all of our collective energy into an investment forum just on adaptation. Because we are pretty much just tired of talking. We want to have an African climate adaptation investment forum that focuses just on that. And as you can see, we are really focusing on action. Our people expect results from us, and we have to make sure we deliver those results. Once again, thank you very much for coming, and I look forward to seeing you at COP28.
That brings us to the end of this event, but not the end of the journey, and I want to end up with a personal experience. Just before we started the summit, I was in Makwene, here in Kenya, where I met Anne Akinye. And Anne Akinye, in the last few years, pulled out her kids from school because of the drought. And now with the support of AAAP, she got supported with drought-tolerant seeds, sandbanks, thanks to the African Development Bank and the support of the Global Center on Adaptation. Her kids are back in school. She is now producing more than she's ever produced before, is selling to local markets. The reminder is this. This adaptation narrative sounds very abstract, but this is about people, this is about development, and most importantly, investing in adaptation makes Africa unstoppable. Thank you very much indeed. Wish you a pleasant day.